Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. Expect a warm day in Riverside today with a high reaching 83.7 degrees and the temperature dropping down to 67.8 overnight. Make sure you stay comfortable as you head out. We have a packed show for you. We are going to examine how the Supreme Court is addressing the debate regarding the future of birthright citizenship. We will also dive into the reasons why the government shutdown is impacting operations at airports across the United States. Beyond those major stories, we have plenty of other updates from around the nation that you will not want to miss. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a case that could reshape what it means to be born American. The Supreme Court is just 2 days away from hearing oral arguments in Trump versus Barbara, a direct challenge to birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. Our reporter, Ethan, has been following this story since it started. Ethan, take us back to the beginning. How did we get here?
It all started on Inauguration Day last year, January 20th, 2025. President Trump signed Executive Order 14160, titled, Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. The Washington Post and NPR both reported that it directed federal agencies to stop automatically granting citizenship to babies born on U.S. soil if their mothers were unlawfully present or held only temporary visas. So we're talking about tourist visas, student visas, that sort of thing. The administration's argument is that birthright citizenship has been overapplied for more than a century.
Overapplied? That's a strong claim when you're talking about something that's been settled law for so long.
It really is. Reuters, through the Japan Times, described this as an attempt to overturn 125 years of established legal bedrock. The administration frames it as closing a loophole that encourages birth tourism and illegal immigration. But critics say there's no loophole to close, because the 14th Amendment means exactly what it says. That tension is the heart of what the justices will wrestle with on Wednesday.
And those arguments dig deep into history, right? What's the constitutional foundation both sides are standing on?
It goes all the way back to 1866, when the Citizenship Clause was debated on the Senate floor. SCOTUS blog and the Constitution Center have documented this extensively. Senator Jacob Howard, the man who introduced the clause, said it reflected existing common law, the idea that birth on the soil makes you a citizen. But he also listed exclusions for foreigners and aliens belonging to the families of ambassadors. The Trump administration reads that as a broad exclusion covering all non-citizens. The challengers say it only ever applied to people with diplomatic immunity, a much narrower group.
So both sides are reading the same words from 1866 and reaching opposite conclusions.
Exactly, and they each have a Supreme Court case to back them up. The administration leans heavily on Elk versus Wilkins from 1884. That case denied citizenship to a Native American man because he owed allegiance to what the court called a quasi-sovereign tribe. The government argues that jurisdiction requires complete allegiance, and undocumented immigrants can't meet that bar. It's a precedent that carries real weight, even though its original context was very different.
And the other side has its own landmark case?
They do, and it's a big one. United States versus Wong Kim Ark from 1898. The Supreme Court ruled that a man born in San Francisco to Chinese parents was a U.S. citizen simply because he was born here. That case has been the backbone of birthright citizenship ever since. But legal analysts at Sidley and Jackson Lewis point out what they call a crucial distinction. Wong Kim Ark's parents were legal permanent residents. They were domiciled in the country. The current challenge targets children whose parents don't have that status. And the administration sees that gap as decisive.
That distinction between legal residents and undocumented parents seems like it could be the pivot point for the whole case.
It very well could be. And that's exactly where Cecilia Wang comes in. She's the legal director of the ACLU, and she'll be arguing against the executive order on Wednesday. The Washington Post profiled her recently and noted that her own parents immigrated from Taiwan. Her strategy, according to both the Post and the ACLU's own filings, centers on what she calls the plain meaning of jurisdiction. She argues it simply means being subject to American laws, If you can get a speeding ticket, you're under U.S. jurisdiction.
That's a pretty straightforward argument. Does she go beyond that?
She does. Wong is also making a stare decisis argument, warning the justices that overturning Wong Kim Ark would, quote, shatter the foundation of American life, end quote. And she draws a direct line to Dred Scott, reminding the court that the 14th Amendment was written specifically to prevent the creation of a permanent subclass of people living in this country. That's a powerful historical echo, and it's clearly deliberate. She wants the justices to feel the weight of what reversing course would mean.
Speaking of echoes, I understand there's a personal connection to Wong Kim Ark that's surfaced in this debate?
There is, and it's a remarkable detail. The Japan Times highlighted Norman Wong, who's the great-grandson of Wong Kim Ark. He still lives in San Francisco. He's described the current challenge as a painful echo of the discrimination his ancestor faced in the 1890s. For him, this isn't abstract constitutional theory. It's his family's story being relitigated more than a century later, and that gives you a sense of just how personal this fight is for many people.
Now, before this case reached the Supreme Court, there was another ruling that complicated things. What happened with Trump versus Casa last summer?
That was a game-changer in a procedural sense. In June 2025, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in Trump versus Casa to limit nationwide injunctions. Jackson Lewis and Sidley both reported on this. It meant that when a district court blocked the executive order, the protection only applied to the specific parties in that lawsuit. It didn't shield everyone in the country the way nationwide injunctions traditionally had.
So what did that actually look like on the ground?
It created what people started calling a patchwork of citizenship rights. States like Texas, Florida, and Alabama began issuing birth certificates with status pending notations for children of undocumented parents. Meanwhile, sanctuary states like California and Washington kept recognizing full citizenship. Thousands of infants were stuck in a documentation purgatory with no social security numbers, no passports. That lasted from roughly July 2025 until late last year, when a class-wide injunction in the Barbara case finally halted federal enforcement while the Supreme Court prepares to weigh in.
The human toll of that limbo is hard to imagine. What are experts projecting if the executive order is ultimately upheld?
The numbers are staggering. NPR reports that nonpartisan groups estimate 255,000 children would be born without citizenship every single year. By 2045, that could add up to 4.8 million stateless or non-citizen residents living in this country. Experts are using the phrase caste-like status to describe what that would look like. An entire generation growing up in America but locked out of the rights and systems that citizens rely on.
And that brings us to education, which could take a massive hit. What are the stakes for schools?
They're enormous on multiple fronts. Right now, the 1982 ruling in Plyler v. Doe guarantees every child a free public education regardless of immigration status. But NPR and EdWeek report that states like Tennessee have already introduced trigger bills. Tennessee's HB 793 and SB 836 would mandate collecting immigration data in schools. And here's the key part. If Plyler is ever overturned or birthright citizenship is narrowed, those laws automatically kick in to deny enrollment or charge tuition to undocumented students.
So states are essentially preloading legislation in anticipation of a ruling?
That's exactly the strategy. ED Trust Tennessee and EdWeek report that the Heritage Foundation, through its Project 2025 framework, has encouraged states to challenge what it calls the fiscal burden of immigration. Tennessee's bills are designed to give the Supreme Court a future test case to revisit Plyler v. Doe. The argument is that rising costs for ESL programs and school infrastructure represent a substantial state interest that justifies excluding non-citizens from taxpayer-funded education.
What about students with disabilities? I imagine there's a funding concern there, too.
There is, and it's one that doesn't get enough attention. Schools across the country rely on between $4 billion and $6 billion in Medicaid funding to serve students with disabilities. That covers things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, mental health services. Since Medicaid is generally restricted to citizens, stripping birthright citizenship would shift those costs entirely onto local school districts. Many of them simply can't absorb that, and beyond K-12, undocumented students are already shut out of federal Pell Grants and student loans. Ending birthright citizenship would effectively block millions of future residents from any path to affordable higher education.
The court is expected to rule by late June. What should listeners be watching for on Wednesday?
Wednesday's oral arguments will be the first real signal of where the justices are leaning. Listen for how they treat the Wong Kim Ark precedent. If the conservative majority starts drawing sharp lines between legal residents and undocumented parents, that'll tell us a lot. Cecilia Wang's challenge is to convince the court that the 14th Amendment's promise doesn't hinge on who your parents are. The decision, expected by late June, will determine whether birthright citizenship remains a territorial guarantee or becomes something conditional, based on parental status.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of this. It's a historic moment no matter which way the court rules.
It really is, Grace. Thanks for having me.
We'll, of course, be following Wednesday's arguments closely. Coming up next, our second story of the morning. We turn now to our other big story this morning, and it's one affecting millions of Americans trying to get anywhere by plane. The partial government shutdown is now 44 days old, and airports across the country are buckling. Chloe has been following this one closely. Chloe, just how bad is it right now?
It's really bad, Grace. We're in what experts are calling a standstill environment at major airports nationwide. TSA officers and air traffic controllers have been working without pay for over 6 weeks now. CBS News and The Washington Post both trace this back to a Department of Homeland Security funding lapse that started on February 14th. That's 44 days ago, which makes this officially the longest government shutdown in American history, surpassing the 35-day record from 2018 and 2019.
And we saw the Senate try to break the logjam just 3 days ago on Friday. What happened there?
The Senate actually passed a bipartisan funding bill by voice vote, which seemed like a real off-ramp. But The Guardian reported that House Speaker Mike Johnson rejected it almost immediately. His objection was that the bill didn't include funding for immigration and customs enforcement. So the bill's dead on arrival, and to make matters worse, the Senate left town for a 2-week recess. There's essentially no one in Washington right now with the power or the will to fix this.
So with no deal in sight, what does this actually look like for someone trying to catch a flight today?
Think about showing up 4 hours early and still being nervous about making your gate. Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, the world's busiest airport, has become the epicenter of this mess. Atlanta Today reports security lines have regularly exceeded 3 hours, snaking all the way into baggage claim areas and even out into parking decks. Houston and New Orleans are dealing with TSA call-out rates as high as 42.3%, and the New York airports might be the scariest situation of all.
What's different about New York?
It's not just TSA there, it's the air traffic controllers. Some facilities in the Northeast Corridor have seen controller absences as high as 80%. The FAA has had to cut traffic flow by 10% just to maintain basic safety margins. When you lose that many controllers, you can't just push the same number of planes through the system. Every reduction ripples out to delays and cancellations at airports hundreds of miles away.
And we're not just talking about inconvenience here. There's a real economic cost.
Enormous. The U.S. Travel Association, cited by Travelers United, puts the economic toll at roughly $1 billion per week in lost revenue and productivity. That's airlines, hotels, restaurants, rental car companies, convention centers, all of it. And it compounds every single day this drags on. Small businesses near airports that depend on traveler foot traffic are getting crushed too.
Now, Yahoo News reported through the Associated Press that nearly 500 TSA officers have actually quit since this started. The president signed an executive memorandum on Friday to address that. Is the money actually flowing?
It's starting to. Forbes and ABC News reported that the memorandum directs DHS to use available funds with what the order calls a logical nexus to TSA operations. That's essentially creative accounting to get emergency back pay to about 60,000 workers. As of today, internal DHS notifications say the first wave of direct deposits has started hitting bank accounts. But union leaders from the American Federation of Government Employees are warning people not to celebrate just yet. These are manual, off-cycle payments, not regular payroll, so many officers probably won't see the money until midweek at the earliest.
Even when that money lands, how long before things actually feel normal at the airport?
Experts interviewed by CBS News and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution say it'll take anywhere from 3 to 10 days of consistent paychecks before staffing levels stabilize. You have to remember, these workers haven't just been unpaid, they've been stressed, demoralized, and in some cases they've taken second jobs. Getting them back to full capacity isn't like flipping a switch. And the 500 who already resigned aren't coming back at all. Those positions take months to fill and train.
Meanwhile, the administration has also sent about 1,000 ICE agents to airports. What exactly are they doing there?
Officially, they're handling non-screening duties at 14 major airports. Maryland Governor Wes Moore told the Associated Press that ICE agents at Baltimore Washington International are there specifically to, quote, speed up the clearance process, end quote. So think line management, crowd control, and ID verification at certain checkpoints. The legal authority comes from a few different places, including a federal statute that lets the DHS secretary reassign personnel during emergencies, and also from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed in 2025, which was a $75 billion package that kept ICE fully funded even as TSA's budget lapsed.
But this is controversial. Civil liberties groups have raised real concerns.
Very much so. The ACLU and reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution suggests the staffing crisis is being used as a pretext for immigration enforcement inside domestic terminals. While ICE agents are officially there for line management, they've been observed vetting passenger IDs in ways that go beyond simple crowd control. Reports describe an atmosphere of deterrence, particularly for travelers with vulnerable immigration statuses. That's people with pending asylum cases, mixed status families, even legal permanent residents who feel uneasy showing documents to immigration agents just to board a domestic flight.
So you've got long lines, unpaid workers, ICE agents in terminals. Are people just giving up on flying?
A lot of them are, yes. Business Insider detailed a growing trend of Americans switching to long-distance Amtrak routes. And we're talking about serious trade-offs here. A train from Chicago to New York takes about 20 hours compared to a 2-hour flight. But travelers are deciding that's worth it. One traveler named Sarah Johnson told National Today that the 20-minute seamless boarding process and the comfort of the train beat what she called the madness at TSA checkpoints.
Is Amtrak actually able to handle that kind of surge?
They're trying. Amtrak has reported a massive jump in ridership, especially on the Crescent Line that runs from New Orleans up to New York. Officials say they're prepared to add extra trains if demand keeps climbing. It's a remarkable moment for passenger rail in a country that has historically underinvested in it. Whether this becomes a lasting shift or just a crisis response, that's something we'll be watching in the weeks ahead.
So as we sit here on March 30th, what should travelers actually do if they need to fly this week?
The advice right now is to arrive at least 4 hours before your departure, especially at major hubs like Atlanta, Houston, and the New York area airports. Monitor wait time trackers, but keep in mind that New York airports have warned their data is, quote, highly volatile, end quote, because staffing shifts so rapidly. And honestly, if your trip is flexible, a lot of travel advisors are saying consider delaying it or finding an alternative. The emergency pay is a positive sign, but we're still days away from any real improvement on the ground. ICE agents will remain on site until what the administration calls normal operations are restored. And no one can say exactly when that will be.
And of course, none of this gets fully resolved until Congress comes back and actually passes a funding bill.
That's the fundamental problem. The executive memorandum is a Band-Aid. It buys time and puts some money in workers' pockets, but it doesn't fund DHS. The Senate won't be back for 2 weeks. And even then, there's no guarantee the House will accept any deal that doesn't include ICE funding. So we could be looking at this crisis stretching well into April. The political gridlock in Washington is having a very direct, very tangible impact on ordinary Americans just trying to get where they need to go.
Such a frustrating situation for so many people. Chloe, thank you for breaking all of that down for us this morning.
Of course, Grace. We'll keep following it.
Here are some other headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is looking to bridge the gap in regional security by expanding the ground invasion of southern Lebanon. He ordered the military to widen a security buffer zone toward the Litani River to streamline the border situation. The Israel Defense Forces are dismantling Hezbollah anti-tank missile caches, though the mission has come at a high price with the death of Sergeant Laron Ben-Zion during maneuvers. This offensive has displaced over 1 million Lebanese citizens and caused more than 1,200 deaths. Tensions reached a boiling point after an Indonesian United Nations peacekeeper was killed by artillery fire hitting a UN position. This marks the largest campaign since 2006, with officials signaling they may stay deep within the territory for months or potentially years as part of a broader conflict involving direct U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Moving to the skies, Air China is taking flight again between Beijing and Pyongyang after a 6-year hiatus. The carrier is winging it with a weekly Monday schedule using Boeing 737-700 aircraft, starting with flight CA-121. This follows the restoration of daily train services between the capitals on March 12. While the passenger list is up in the air, limited mostly to business personnel and students, analysts see this as a major departure for North Korea's reopening. In Italy, authorities are trying to paint a clearer picture of a brazen art heist near Parma. Masked thieves made a quick getaway from the Magnani Rocca Foundation, with 3 masterpieces by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Paul Cézanne, and Henri Matisse. Suspects were in and out of the French Room in under 3 minutes, making off with 9 million euros worth of treasure, including Renoir's Les Poissons. While the alarm may have saved a 4th painting from being framed, the loss of these pieces has left a permanent mark on Italy's cultural heritage. Things are heating up across the western United States as a record-shattering heatwave peaks this month. Temperatures hit a blistering 112 degrees Fahrenheit near the California-Arizona border, a national record for March that has everyone feeling the burn. With over 1,500 records broken across 14 states, the early sizzle is melting snowpacks, sparking fears of a dry summer and a fiery wildfire season. Experts say human-caused climate change made this dome of heat 5 times more likely. Finally, a new investigation shows that for some nursing home moguls, a presidential pardon is just what the doctor ordered to avoid paying up. ProPublica reports that victims of owners like Joseph Schwartz are struggling to collect $19 million in damages because federal clemency erased their restitution obligations. With nearly $2 billion in victim recovery off the table, Arkansas officials are trying to prescribe legal remedies through Medicaid fraud charges. This ensures that the burden of fraud does not shift back to the taxpayers or the families who suffered under neglect. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.